chairs are more comfortable up there.
I'd like to call to order the March 13, 2024 meeting of the Isle of Palms Planning Commission and acknowledge that the press and the public were duly notified in accordance with state law. First item on the agenda is the approval of our minutes from our last meeting on February 14. Any comments or motions?
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Got a motion to approve in a second. Any conversation? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. First order of new business, only business, discussion of stormwater recommendations. And Douglas. what
Yep,
can you-
let me kind of give a quick overview. It seems like the members, not everybody's been here, I think, all at once, so we'll kind of just start a little bit as a recap. You all have been, you've taken the, kind of started from the Davis and Floyd recommendations of improvements to the zoning code that would oversee development as it happens, as it goes through the permitting process, kind of working from what we had in the code and what we're used to dealing with, and layering in some new requirements. At the last meeting, we kind of got to a point that I think the group thought it would be helpful to have some outside perspective. And we have Rick Karkowski here with us today. He's with Thomas and Hutton. Thomas and Hutton has been the designer for the large, most recent drainage projects for the island. They also happen to be the agency that authored the Old Village Builder's Guide, I think they call it, the Builder's Guide. And from my kind of looking through that Builder's Guide, and I know Ron has kind of referenced his experience with it, it seems to be kind of close. It's getting at the same kind of questions that I think this group has had about our code. And I'll let Rick talk to this, but their Builder's Guide, I think, pretty well makes a new property owner building a new house do the calculations as to how much was running off, and then a new house really can't change it, I don't think, at all. We talked about that being an option, kind of a highly engineered option, what I'll kind of call the high-level solution. And then we've also talked about the possibility of developing, and I think Rick's term for it would be a black box solution, where the community would adopt, and I'm just going to throw out a concept, would adopt a correlating or kind of a ratio of, if you cover this many square feet, you're going to provide X amount of cubic feet of retention, and that would be kind of just a simplistic formula, kind of like our lot coverage ratio. It's you're allowed to cover a certain percentage of your lot with impervious surfacing. Matt then verifies that in the review process. So kind of have two different options that I think the group has been talking about. I think Rick could maybe answer questions or speak to either solution. And Rick, if you want to come take a seat. This is, he may have things to show, but, and I don't think, I haven't asked Rick to prepare anything really, because I think we were just anticipating him kind of more answering questions. I did tell him kind of the different concepts that you all have been talking about.
Yes.
So I don't know, we want to, I guess we could ask specifically questions of Rick, or we could.
I could just show a little background of like what our experience was in Mount Pleasant.
Okay.
If that would be any help, just to kind of give you like where we were.
If you could pull the microphone down
I'm
towards.
sorry.
Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you.
I was offering to number one, just share a little of the experience that we gathered, we gained while we're working for Town of Mount Pleasant on the Old Village project. we did a whole master plan for them, and this is not coming up. There it is. So, these are some graphics of what were grappling with at the time. They were things like this was a dual lot house, house built on 2 lots. Somebody, of course, realized that, bought the house, didn't have to, apply for a subdivision, and they built 2 big houses. So essentially, they went from 11% impervious to 40% impervious with just, at right development.
Is that a before and after?
Yeah, it's a before and after. So on the left side is before. So it was a 1,800 square foot house on 2 lots. They built across 2 lots, and then they bought it. And one house is 3,000 square feet, and the other one's 3,600 square feet.
So we have had some occasion of it become one little house going to 2 lots, maybe five times in my last 20 years. So that happens occasionally, but the example of one small house to one big house happens all the time.
So
Kinda constantly.
like this is a house that was expanded, of course, from 2,000 square foot to almost 3,000 square foot, and with the new driveway and everything, that went up from 14% impervious to 20% impervious.
Yeah, we probably typically have a more intensive increase than that. It's probably more common to go from kind of 15 to 35.
Right. This is an ADU. Someone added an ADU to the house. They just went from have a 1,300 square foot house. They added a 1,000 square foot ADU. Went from 9% to 15%. Just again, this is probably what an empty lot, and then they built all the way end to end. So they're essentially 40% coverage and 31% coverage on 2 empty lots that were developed. So this is what the town was dealing with. This is the old village, came up through the years, kind of like Isle of Palms, kind of just developed over time. Things were added on, drainage was added in, so there was not a fully engineered drainage system throughout the entire area like a modern neighborhood would have. And a modern neighborhood would be designed with curb and gutter and inlets and all that. So there's a lot of issues that are caused by this. And another issue is on-street parking, which is a pretty big issue in the old village. Really just people going in there, well, I'm just gonna tear up my front yard in the right of way and make on-street parking either gravel or paved. So that was an issue. So they were grappling with a way to address this, and they said, well, we really just want, this is the only area that we have it. So we helped them develop the builder's guide, and I think you guys got a copy of it. Or
Did I circulate that?
If
I
not,
did, okay.
Yeah, so it was a little bit of collaboration between Thomas and Hutton and some of the engineers at the town, talking through different things, and their essential approach is pre-development, post-development runoff has to be equal to pre-development runoff, and that's the approach. And then there's some other caveats to it, like storage, pushing water onto your neighbor, making sure you're directing water where it should go. So there's caveats in there, and then the requirements to meet that. And so that's kind of how we got to this point. I think it's been fairly successful with the town. We've actually got hired a few times after that to help some home builders meet the code, meet the new code, and generally it's some type of infiltration system, generally maybe under the driveway or along the side yard or something, where they would do a geotechnical report, make sure it would support that type of system, and we'd capture it, direct the water there, and capture the required volume to not cause impacts to the neighbors or anywhere in the neighborhood. So again, it's just kind of like if like the house wasn't there, if it was still an empty lot, that guy, which I think got in before the builder's guide, would have had to do something to make it run off like an empty lot. That's the
I'll just say that, and I know this group talked a little bit about, you know, what should the standard be? Should a new development be looking back to what was there previously? So in one situation, it's vacant, I mean, so it's kind of zero runoff from a structure. We've talked about the situation where somebody is covering 50%. It's not frequent that an old house does that, but we do have some kind of massive driveways. So should we be holding different property owners to different standards depending on what has historically been there? I think this group has talked a little bit about maybe we just, you know, make them deal with it on the same level. I think in talks with Rick, he's kind of convinced me that the industry norm is to kind of copy what was previously there. I think that's the way the state regulations work, it's the way the town of Mount Pleasant. There's something kind of doesn't seem fair about that but I guess in the same regard there. It's the way people seem to kind of do it, is just calculate what was there and address whatever's new.
But we could add caveats. If somebody had a 1,200 square foot single-story home that they decided to raise, and they're developing essentially from a vacant piece of property, I think you could start with that vacant piece of property.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that I was thinking of as I was driving here, because I think in the car instead of paying attention to what I'm doing. Most of the lots, on average, are about 100 by 100 here, so 10,000 square feet. Rainwater design calculations probably fairly consistent, so many inches per hour as a design. And I assume you're taking into consideration that area, that 10,000 square feet. Just because there's a structure on there, you're still getting that same amount of rainfall, you're just redirecting it to certain areas. And I still think the containment of that has become more and more simple, you know, not necessarily, it was, when the overlay district in the village began, everybody was shocked and surprised of what they had to do to make this work. It's kind of gotten to become old hat. It's kind of like properly sealing and flashing your windows back in the days of EFIS, and everybody was getting sued because nobody was flashing window right. Now we all just do it as a matter of course. So, you know, my feeling, and nothing against Thomas and Hutton, because you've done, I think, 2 projects for my clients in that overlay district, is that it's hard to find engineers, it's hard to find surveyors, and you know, Mount Pleasant doesn't care if you get a permit today or in 10 years, they just don't care. They just assume keep it slow. And maybe Palms wants to feel that way too, but people like architects and builders want to keep things moving, and so trying to find the methodology by which we could have some data or program by which we can do this without the aid of engineers, since the town doesn't have one, and is there really the necessity for one? If we could calculate how much surface area requires how much retention area, we could figure out volumes. I think they taught that in high school, maybe even.
So, I think that's what you all would call the black box.
Yeah.
So that would say for every square foot over, I guess, and this would be up for discussion, for every 100 square feet of impervious surfacing that you add by a project, you have to provide X square feet of storage by one of these methods. So that would be would that be something that would be a fairly easy?
Yeah, you could do
Calculation.
You could run a spreadsheet calculation and it would be a chart or something.
And I guess there's different, we've kind of talked about the storage under a pervious driveway. We can count that volume, but I guess that's significantly different than like a vaulted system that's completely open.
Similar.
And volume is similar?
Well, the vaulted ones have, of course, like in the vault, it's 100% volume. You know,
Yeah.
And then you have some rock. And rock's
Versus,
like,
versus the rock that
which
would
is
be.
like 40% void. So so if you said I needed 100, no, I need cubic foot of storage. Well, you just can't do 1 cubic foot of rock storage. You have to divide
Four.
1 by 0.4. So and then you'd have, so it's like 1.6 or something like that. I don't know what the
Kind of like
number
we
is.
have to do with hydrostatic fence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, again,
You're taking out the obstruction,
The
you're kind of calling that. So, or I guess you could do even a hybrid, where there's kind of what I'll start calling the black box solution, of this amount of storage for this amount of coverage. But then you could provide, I guess, the ability of an owner to, or kind of design a more sophisticated system and then have a engineer sign off that you're capturing, and we've talked a little bit about this, would it be, you're capturing the first hour of rain of a X storm, or, some basis to do a different design.
Did you guys say one hour on the 25-year storm in this plan?
Is that what you have to?
yeah.
That's what the county regulation is based on, was 25-year storm.
Right.
An hour of the
Well,
25?
no, they just call out the 25-year storm as being
Which we've had two
Where
of.
is it?
right,
Recently.
the design standard as opposed, and I don't think they necessarily got into,
Sorry,
Duration.
they just said 10-year with 24-hour storm. So I
10-year,
had it backwards.
24-hour storm, yeah.
right.
Which is a common design storm.
Right, but
10
again,
year.
Charleston County and our stormwater manual calls out the 25-year storm as being their design, and it's.
And no duration? Do you need both in engineering?
Well, for storage you would, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You need both,
Get
the
the
duration and
Yes.
the
Equations
intensity.
to work out.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I think the difference is 25-year, 1 hour's 3 inches. 15-year, it's 2.25 or something, 2.25. So it's not a huge.
Even though it's half.
Yeah, when you
as
scale down to a
frequent.
single lot size, it's not gonna be
We would, go to NOAA Atlas 14, which has all that information, which so like a 25-year, 1 hour storm is different than a 25-year, 24-hour storm. A 1 hour storm for 25-year return, 1 hour is like 3 inches. But a 25-year, 24 hours, like 8 inches. So you
This is
want
gonna make our head spin, and,
So what happens?
you could
is-
just say 5 inches and just be done.
5
Oh, yeah.
inches of
You could
rain.
just pick a.
But you have to say in a duration, right? 5
No,
inches in a day.
no, because what and again, we're talking retention. So we're saying in the black box that it has to have the volume to capture it and retain it on the site, and then it would never leave the site. It would go in through
Infiltration.
infiltrate. So again, it's just it doesn't matter if it falls in the first hour, if it falls in the 24 hours. You would have a design storm of some depth, 4 inches, 3 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches, whatever. And then that would form the basis of we'll call them nomographs. The
Oh,
nomographs that we would
My
develop.
head's starting to spin.
Yeah, instead of the black box. And
Like, can we just call it the black box?
you could call it the black box.
So my kind of issue I would have with the black box is you're forcing everybody to put this structure on their property, whether it's necessary or not. Because, again, if you did a rain garden per se, to retain its surface, eventually that water's gonna sink down. It will just may take it 2 or 3 hours for the 1 hour storm to go away.
Well,
But isn't a
But,
rain garden
But you
a
could
retention?
you could call a rain garden if it's designed properly. It could be the retention
device.
best management practice
Yeah,
that
that's what I was kind
you
of
would have.
getting
I
at.
mean,
is-
it's just if you wanted to devote that much area of your lawn to that.
And I think too, similar to our tree protection ordinance, where we have a tree protection zone, you could have the choice of staying away from it and not hiring an arborist, or you can challenge that setback with the certified arborist to give you a plan for preserving that tree as you encroach into that space. We could have the black box as a base, whatever those proportions are. If you don't want to do it, you could hire an engineer to circumvent that somehow. And that may work for you or may not, I don't know, or there may be.
Well, that was
there
kind of my point. Now
different
you're hiring an
solutions.
engineer to save yourself from having to hire an engineer and doing something that you don't need to do. That's kind of, yeah, the point of, where you're,
So, David, are you saying that just some minor improvement just doesn't need to be engineered at all?
that's where I was trying to get at. In a lot of cases, I think that would be the case, that you could, through grading, proper grading, not running your gutters out to the street and run them back to, your setback zones. And if your setback zones are fairly flat, then that water's not gonna end up off of your property. So I think there's some extremely low cost, it gets back into, as you're building the building, of where you locate these items on the property, as opposed to having to come back and, like I said, build a vault in your, dig a trench, fill it, and build a vault, if it's never gonna fill up with water.
I mean, there's, I think I hear what you're saying. I
Yeah.
guess from a regulatory standpoint, it would be very hard for one of us to kind of say.
That's true.
In your instance, looks like it would be fine to not comply with this. But I guess I'm wondering if in what you're describing, the kind of best management practices couldn't say that an acceptable retention is just a depressed, 4 inches depressed by,
And I think like a landscape architect could come back and say, I've left this depression zone, it's got this volume, it will retain,
satisfy the
remember-
black box?
Well, remember
Potentially.
we talked about, yeah, I guess, not necessarily my concern, but like what has been the experience is that, yes, that first owner for the first 5 years is gonna like that. But that second owner, or that same owner 7 years from now is not gonna like that.
The low depressed part of his
Yeah,
yard,
and
he's gonna be,
fill it, change it, and then that protection goes away.
he's gonna be wondering why has a squishy part of his.
Why do I have a
his yard.
squishy part of my yard? I'm just gonna fill that
I got a little
and be
small.
done
Yeah.
with it.
Where a thing like and we'll get to this, but we've talked Matt and I about kind of how much could be achieved just by specifying the base to pervious surfaces.
right.
We really scrutinize the surface a lot. We don't scrutinize the depth as much as I think we probably could and should. Could that be part of it too, that we just kind of, really study what that base should be and kind of enforce a base more than we have traditionally. And that starts to create just some built-in storage to every project. An owner's not gonna be inclined to go
Yeah.
undo that. I mean, he's put a lot of money into having it. It would work against him, unlike you're just gonna fill up the squishy part. That seems like that would be challenging to regulate years after the project's done. I think I'm leaning back. Nicole, start giving me the stink eye.
No, yeah, I kind of see the points again. It was, also kind of gets back into what we currently have was what was existing, and once somebody comes in and regrades and changes the property, you're relying that there was some record to show what was there before. So we can't really enforce. I think that becomes kind of a hard enforcement to say, well, now they've built and it's more. Well, if you can't go back and look at, you can't hold the designer accountable. And again, I think most architects, engineers are accountable, but if you're in this gray area where, well, yeah, that's probably not necessary because there's no way they're gonna ever know that, that water didn't already run off the property, so just let it go. It's gonna happen.
Yep.
It gets back to your enforcement of, but if you have a drawing showing a rain garden in somebody's yard, you come, in the neighbor calls and complains, and you come back and it's no longer there, they've done something to violate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
so that-
I will say and we have this with elevated houses, you are kind of creating just a prime, people are just very tempted to to want to use that space. I mean, it's inherent, and we've been fighting it since the beginning of the flood regulations. Of you build something, and people, new owners, they show up, they didn't, like, oh my gosh, this previous owner was so dopey, why didn't they think of just enclosing this and putting a bedroom here? It's just easy additional space. Half of it, I think, is knowingly, working towards doing it. The other half, I think, truly just don't know. So it becomes a tremendous challenge. I mean,
Yeah.
we then get 3 owners deep, we become aware of it, we say, hey, you gotta rip out the underside of your house, lawsuits start flying.
Right.
Not telling you this is a reason to not do it, it just has
It
its
happens.
enforcement challenge.
But the same thing, if you've got the vault in your backyard and your gutter is drained off to it, and you notice that some of the water's splashing out, you cut off the pipe and let your gutter go somewhere else, you just got a big hole in the ground that stays empty.
Yeah.
So I think, you got that same issue no matter what solution, because I don't know if we can make them permanent. But there's just some thoughts in there. I'm not sure what is the right answer.
I mean, this all starts, again, from a point of if you
Rich,
expand by,
Talking to
this all starts if you begin to expand more than 920
Correct.
square feet.
Yeah,
right?
you have to have a
So you
project.
have to have a project that triggers that.
Right, that
And
triggers.
then you're saying, okay, when you do want to exceed that size, then the black box discussion on what the quantity is, and then we're getting into now what are the options to deal with that water, whether it's a
Yeah.
retention, a rain garden, or other means to keep the runoff from going off-site. So there has to be some means for that, is what we're trying to say.
Right.
No, yeah, I
And
agree.
the quantity is, we just have to say, okay, if it's 5 inches, then it's, there's a number, or.
And for surface runoff consideration, somebody adding 650 feet to a 1,500 square foot house with a 20% lot coverage is far less impactful than the 3,000 square foot house doing that same thing, nearing his 35% capacity. So maybe it's a dual edge thing, or two milestones you need to hit: a minimum or a maximum lot coverage to begin with, because I'm sure that 1,500 square foot lot, impervious covered lot is probably draining fine. But at what point does it start not draining well?
Sometimes it's not how the lot drains, but it's how the neighbor 3 lots down drains. That's the I believe part of the intent of the regulation, or the proposed regulation.
Well, we do have we do. We have quite a few areas where that is the exact case, where there are very low properties off in a distance. And I would use an example. It's Forest Trail, and then down at Charleston Boulevard in Carolina, all that confluence. I mean, you got a great big huge sand dune, and then you got a hole
Yep.
down from that house. But I remember the rec department when, before they really built what's there now, was basically a swamp, and they filled it, and they had to ditch down the street. Oh, I'm sorry. But I'm sitting here thinking about in those terms, and yet 2 blocks up from the rec department, you're on a very high ancient sand dune system, almost all the way down Cameron Boulevard. And so when you're building, you take a 900 square foot concrete J.C. Long house out, and you put in a 3,000, 5,000 square foot home on those lots, you're still percolating through. You're not really running off on those unless you have massive, driveways.
What you're saying, a 5,000 square foot house still percolates
Well,
water
and
in?
the footprint's never gonna, it's not really 5,000, it's 2 or 3 or 4 stories, depending upon
Yeah.
how that's constructed, so the footprint.
But you're saying the yard, that house's yard
With
still is
35%
penetrating.
coverage.
Yeah,
it's-
the lot coverage,
65% is still absorbing, and you alluded to it earlier about kind of the percolation rate of a different lot. I challenge it 5 blocks down on 30th Avenue, where it's very low, 29th in particular, where it ponds up, the rec department, versus up on Cameron, you don't have that same situation.
Wasn't it
And
just
is that-
running away from Cameron? I mean, isn't that the different Cameron, it's kind of running
That's
down
kind
the
of,
hill, and then at the rec department, it's flat, it's low, so it's all collecting there and then just,
that would be kind of like
Sitting.
where I was being on Cameron and walking through those neighborhoods all the time is, yeah, you retain the water on that property, you know, it just sits there, but if, again, whatever hits the driveway or the gutters that lead out to the driveway runs to the street, down the street to the First Avenue, down that avenue to Hartnett, and hits the low area. And you can even, like I said, with walking the dogs, you can see people that have their sprinklers on and you see the trail of water running down Cameron,
that hill.
down Hartnett, or it runs the other direction and out to Palm.
yeah, you're kind of on a ridge there.
Your ridge there, so any water that hits the pavement just follows the pavement until it hits the lowest spot and into somebody, like you said, into somebody's yard.
What about, if the property has a drainage ditch immediately adjacent, all the water clearly gets collected, clearly goes into the ditch? I mean, that has, I guess, some cumulative issue with the outfalls you try to design, but it's not going to anybody's
Death by
yard.
1,000 cuts.
Is that how you would, I mean,
would say
see them as needing to do something?
I would say, like, if everybody, again, like, if you let everybody do that, eventually you're gonna have an impact. So, I think it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Which has always been my concern about these perfect drainage plans for a single lot. Because I've been trained, take it to a ditch, take it to the street, neither of which were designed for their runoff. But that's what we're told to do.
And that's the common, I
And
mean,
I
that
think
is,
that's the thing
so-
we gotta change,
But
is
we're
that's
also,
not what to do.
we're enforcing, this property here, and obviously the effect could be down there, and there's really no way, and I've had some engineering buddies of mine complain that they're working on this project here and having to resolve Sneak Farm's drainage problems, because Mount Pleasant will make you do that.
that's a good question. We've had the negative,
Right.
how does the town of Mount Pleasant, I think we had this conversation. You're the low lot. You've collected 7 of your neighbor's yard. You've collected their water. In the town of Mount Pleasant, you would have to continue to collect that?
There's a requirement, like, so if the lot had a natural, like, storage component and you were getting rid of that natural storage component, you would have to mitigate for that. So that is correct.
That seems a little crazy to me, but I guess that's,
I would, yeah, on the island I would, again, because we have so few empty lots now that there are a couple that have historically for the last, however long, have been empty and are storage and somebody, but I think that there's not many of those. I think it's
So
more of
is
the
the reason
cases that it's a low lot that's already been built, and over the years, more and more water has been draining to it.
so is the fact that there's not many, is that rationale to not require them to keep accepting it? Or would that be rationale to say there's only a handful of you that will have to contend with it, so you're gonna have to collect it?
Oh, that's a good question.
I
mean-
think that this group, prior to what you
think we're
just heard,
saying
I
we
think
do
this
have to
group has
collect
kind of settled on, you don't have to continue. If you're a low lot, it's not the fair thing to make you continue to collect all your neighbors' water, but maybe that's an engineering problem.
I mean, the only thing I would caution against is like, that's fine, that's a, that's a way to go, but I think that lot would have, that owner would be responsible for coming up with a plan that makes no impact on his neighbors, like, if.
So if that water was naturally going there,
He's got
how
like,
else can you,
where's it gonna go?
how else can you kind of be assured you're not negatively impacted, other than the
That, I mean, you guys have heard, this is the fill and build thing from all these, communities that are like, people have like, this guy built in the 60s, slab on grade, and this guy comes over here and he fills his lot up and then puts it up there, and then so all the water is pushed onto that lot. the guy from the '60s, and he's got a problem now where he didn't have a problem before. The guy that filled the lot, he doesn't have a problem because he filled the lot. So that's the fill and build.
And I think that was specifically, it was Davis and Floyd's recommendation, and they called it like a volumetric offset. Basically, same thing. If you need to add whatever, 1,000 cubic feet, you're gonna provide 1,000 cubic feet of depression elsewhere.
And there's precedence for that, in floodplain management and stormwater management and all that. I mean, we
I
see
was
that
reading the
places.
Old Village, in the 2 points where one, you can't change what's already running onto the property if it's coming from neighbors. So you can't impede it and put a wall up and say, oh, I stopped it suddenly. And then you can't negatively impact your neighbors by what you do.
Right.
So it seemed like those were the two.
So if you
At
have
least
water
what I read
coming,
in
yeah,
right up there.
if you had water coming to you and it used to collect, you would just have to figure out a way to maybe collect it and take it around and point it at hopefully a city inlet. That's I think the intent.
And if
say
you
you
don't
couldn't
have a
run
city
off,
inlet,
just
then
couldn't.
you just collect
To the
what you always
street.
collect.
See, that's again where I think, and we have problems here in our community, and I would say the lower end towards Waterway Boulevard from 21st to 41st. Those properties are inundated by, if you will, David Cohen's house on Cameron.
He's running right downhill to it.
But no, it is.
Yeah.
It's Cameron down Hartnett,
Yeah.
down to Waterway Boulevard. And so what I hear you kind of alluding to is they just have to suck it up and keep taking everybody's water. How do I fix my home from flooding all the time? And we have a resident that was just flooded again this past weekend, second time in less than 3 months from a rain event in that area. So how do we let them fix their problem?
What address is that? Or what street is that?
Is that the one near, I think this? could be-
Steve and Carly David's house.
Yeah.
Not
So
to
that
mention
is the
names, their
one near
initials are.
23rd.
So,
That we,
Whereabouts?
one of the two areas, we
22nd to 23rd.
right across
Oh,
from
okay.
Whispering Palms.
Yeah.
the pond as
Okay.
you go down Waterway right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes back, I see both sides of it is, historically, when they built those homes, did they have that problem? Or is that problem caused because the island didn't protect them for the last 40 years? And now we're gonna hold them accountable, have to come up with some way to protect themselves because it's kind of the city. That's the other side of that argument I think you're getting into. I'm not sure which is the right answer per se. I kind of tend to believe, goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is allow them to protect. If they want to build for lack of better, a brick wall around their property to prevent any additional water from coming in that's been pushed to them over the years because the city hasn't protected them, why should they have to do more than that? Why should they have to now figure out how to pump the water that used to come to them to some safe place? Again, it's gonna impact the people right beside them.
But
But that's-
yeah, if you build that brick wall around that property in particular, around 22nd Avenue, and stop other people's water from coming through to you, then it now backs up in
Them.
the neighbor's property.
Right.
Versus I'm taking all the water now. I'm the lowest point. So, and I'm not trying to solve it, I'm just saying, I know that we have some issues
Yeah.
where.
Yeah,
That's a
that's
tough
an issue too.
Philosophical kind of policy question, and I kind of go back and forth on.
As an outside perspective, I say it's a community issue because it's really not their water.
Right,
It's a community issue, in my humble.
but hopefully some of the
Outside
other
opinion.
stuff that we're doing is gonna
That wasn't asked.
start preventing that water from building up in those low
Well,
spots.
and that just so happens in that specific situation, Thomas and Hutton is, sorry, excuse me, different engineer. They are designing a solution. I mean, they happen to have drainage infrastructure like 50 feet away. So that one, from my perspective, happens to be a very easy engineering solution. But it's never had it, and why, and from my perspective, the last go-round that they had damage was because of a kind of unprecedented tidal event. And I've heard just today, I think, that they had issues again. Because we didn't have the tides we had, obviously in December this past weekend. So a little surprised to hear that it has happened again. So not crystal clear on what has changed there. But in that isolated situation, and that's a luxury. I mean, it's not frequent that we have a drainage problem, and it's like, well, there's a drain right there. We can get water 50 feet away. Usually, and Rick has to deal with this, for the example of 38th and Palm, where Palm Boulevard pretty well becomes impassable. There's no drainage for 4 blocks. So what do? You have to do a very expensive drainage project to install catch inlets to get it away.
And where are you gonna take it?
It
That's a
used to
good
run
question.
to the beach.
His house.
No, it used to
That's
run
where my
down
water- yeah,
to
that's
the
where my water
beach,
goes.
Yeah.
but the sand dunes have built up so that it dams it now. It creates a huge problem there.
Yeah. All right, so, did we learn anything? Black box, we going the model of the Old Village Builder's Guide? Are we gonna stick with kind of what we have and say, hire an engineer? Do the best you can, and don't change don't change what you're running after your project than you had prior to your project?
Well, the biggest problem is the small home that gets bought and turned into a huge home. And that's been going on now for 10, 12 years. And Palm Boulevard doesn't look the same.
Right.
So the runoff is definitely, the flooding in 38th and Palm is getting worse. It's not getting better. And I'm not sure, this impervious versus pervious really catches me, because every day I walk the dog and all the driveways are all flooded and they're brick. So impervious, my ass.
Rick and I have this conversation too.
There's-
He tells me that's groundwater.
Yeah, well, it could
He
be.
says that's groundwater. I don't know if I believe it.
Well, groundwater that's going into people's garages, doesn't matter how you define it. But I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that bigger homes are being built and there's more runoff from those
And more
homes.
diverted. It
And there's no
depends.
swales. I mean, up north, we have swales in between properties. The water all goes in there and just sits for a month. Here, we don't have that.
So up north, those swales don't lead anywhere.
No.
They
they're
just
to the
hold
street.
it.
It eventually either goes to the street or it goes to a stream, like
Or
Des Plaines
detention-
River or
detention
something like
pond
that.
Or ditch or whatever.
We have a catchment
I
pond.
still draw those that way.
We have one in our yard. It's between the two homes.
Just
It
a
gets
low
about-
spot between the homes.
Yeah, it gets about that deep, and I put a pump in there to pump it out to the intercoastal. Sorry.
That's what all the ponds do in Wild Dunes.
Yeah.
It's a natural problem.
Well, I think that's kind of what we're talking about. You create this depression,
Right.
and you
But that-
probably want it away from your house. You probably end up putting it between your
But
houses.
if we were to also then take, and I've been misusing the term rain garden, the gravelled vault that's, could be sodded or driven on top or be part of your driveway. If these brick pervious driveways are saturated, then we go through all this effort for people to put in these devices, and if the ground can't handle it, what have we achieved?
Right, and if I'm not mistaken, there's a requirement of you have to at least look at the geotechnical part of it, see if the groundwater's there, and there's the black blocksness, there's gonna be requirements, I would think, is the groundwater appropriate for what we're asking to do, there's gotta be some check mark.
So the black box can work as long as you
X, Y, and Z.
verify there's enough clearance between groundwater.
Yep, and then if not, then they might have to be forced into, looking at it some other way. You should possibly have you know, not a black box option.
Yeah,
Which is nice, cause it individualizes the homes now, and that you can't blanket it. So as one affects the other.
the hybrid,
applies,
the
yes.
hybrid approach you're saying kind of gives flexibility of
Mhm.
use the simpler equation if you like, or something more elaborate if your engineer will design it for you.
Because every lot is unique.
Yeah.
And every issue is gonna be unique.
Well, and Pound could have a solution, but the state lets people park their cars where you wanna put the culvert. You can't park in a 4-foot deep trench.
Exactly. That's awesome.
Pipe in there and gravel it.
That would solve a lot of
Well, I
problems.
think that was
Well,
the
it would.
intent of the original ditch, but then
Right.
everybody started pumping their own water into this, so the water on the road that used to be retained by that ditch is now full of everybody else's water.
So David, you think the intent of the original ditch was to block parking? Is that
No,
what
no,
you're
the
saying?
intent of the original ditch was to collect the rainwater off
Yeah,
of Paul
okay. All
Boulevard.
right, I misunderstood the,
No, and then over the years, people have encroached upon that and drained to it, so now it can't, it's full, so it can't take the water off of Paul.
yeah, we have repeatedly heard from the DOT that our, 12-inch by 12-inch roadside ditch was only intended to drain that
Foot wide road.
20-foot wide road.
Yeah,
It had no intention or no design of accepting every 7,000 square foot house to it and running that back to the waterway. So, I mean, that's part of
yeah.
the problem, and
Right.
years and years of running it to a tiny.
The nice thing about this plan is at least nothing in the gray. I mean, it's pretty black and white, so you're not left going, how do I, how do I achieve?
And
Town
from,
has
from
engineers, right?
they do.
So I mean, that would be, and we've talked a little bit about the fact that we don't have an engineer, so we would, if we were, we don't have an in-staff engineer. We
Right.
hire plenty of engineers. That would be another person that we would be hiring. If we were to require that level of kind of analysis and detail, we would then need to hire somebody to review it and advise us on it. But that, I think that we would just, if that was the will of the group, I think we would just, that would be another expense that would get rolled back to the project owner.
What would happen if we had engineering consultants tell us we need culverts, go all the way down Palm?
So I mean, I think that's basically the DOT would tell us, we will give you permission to do it. If you would like to do it, we will give you permission to do it, but it's extremely expensive.
And ours to maintain thereafter.
Yeah, and ours
And what's gonna happen with the parking then? How does that correlate?
So, and I think that, and to just kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit, but the area between, and I don't know if it's 37th or 38th and 41st along Palm, collects water, doesn't have a system. Thomas and Hutton identified that as a project that we need to do sooner rather than later, probably 6 years ago. We're now, but, I mean, we've spent $10 million in the last few years on other priorities, but that is now the next priority that's gonna get addressed. So, I think we're waiting on a
Yeah.
proposal. It also is dovetailing in with a sewer project that's happening from the Water and Sewer Commission. So it happens to be that area of the island is gonna be dug up, sewer lines added, a lot of work in that kind of quadrant. And at the same time, we would be adding drainage there. But it'll all be pipes with
Yeah.
catch basins, so the public will still be able to park over it just as they can today.
So if you'd have been in planning commission maybe 10 years ago, when they first came out and started talking about area-wide drainage, there are different types of drainage catch basin. They're open surface drainage, there's contained pipework drainage, and we've got a little bit of everything going on here.
And so that system is also gonna be in place on Waterway Boulevard?
Well, it's, right now, we're doing projects that are collecting the existing system at the end of those existing system and kind of creating a little bit of a superhighway at the end. So that the water can really get out of the end, and we're finishing. It's also sealing off the tidal water that comes back. I mean, that water not only kind of brings crap with it that silts in, but it also obviously takes away the capacity when tides are high, there's nowhere for the water to run.
I
So-
can't tell you how many beer cans, old beer cans I took out of my yard in December after that flood.
Oh, I
So
bet.
came around,
Went over our.
Over the wall.
Over our wall, into the yard, but it brought, I mean, I must have had 100 old beer cans.
so is that from the marina, you think? All
No,
from the
we're on
marina?
the waterway side. From the waterway.
They were
Just
just sitting there
randomly-
in the marsh,
Yeah.
Wow.
waiting to get Jeff.
I picked up yours too.
That's right.
And those outfalls are all big enough for whatever improvements the city chooses to do interior.
Yeah, to get the
All the-
water, they're kind of sized.
They're size
appropriately.
enough for any future drainage improvements that the city wants to do.
So that 25th and 32nd Avenue outfalls that they've improved are
Not-
really draining the center of the island significantly improved over what was happening.
Yeah, 25th was not really an upsizing project. That was purely a sealing project, but I'm gonna call it 30th
30th
and
Forest Trail. We call it
Forest Trail and 41st.
Oh, 30th is what I'm talking
Yeah,
about. That-
we did
that's
do
the
a
big
project
one.
at 25th as well, but that was more to just stop the flow in.
The tide. Yeah.
Built
So
a
how
dam.
are you all feeling in terms of directionally? Are we getting?
I have a question. On average, what is the cost, number one, to engineer what we're talking about? And number two, to implement it on an average?
New house, let's just say you're talking
Yeah.
new house,
Just,
that the
Yeah.
person who bought two, or let's go, I guess worst case was the low guy who,
Yeah, 5 to 10,000 engineering fee, and probably they're gonna spend 50,000.
total, or
25 to 50,000 on on the drainage, on the implementation.
and
Ballpark.
when you do that, here on the Isle of Palms, you're looking at $30,000 in additional tie-ins for sewer, minimum. So you've just added 100,000 to somebody to,
If you're building a $5
Well,
million
I
house,
was
tough
gonna
shit.
say, you're building a $5 million house.
yeah,
Yeah.
the second
Try to
50's
get
already
paid for
there. So an additional though, sounds like 50 plus
not sour
10
grapes.
design fee?
Yeah,
So total kind of 60.
plus or minus.
Well, if you know that up front, you figure it into the cost.
On a complete rebuild, yeah, I don't really see that as an issue. I was more of the person that wants to take their 750 square foot house and add a 600 square foot addition to it.
I just had one of those calls yesterday.
that would
And
be
now
a
you,
hybrid.
now they're looking at
In
$40,000
one
or
of our problem
$50,000
areas.
just to, without even starting.
Yeah.
But that is there's a threshold, you have to meet that 600 square foot. That's
Right
the
now it's
threshold.
625.
Yeah.
Did we change it? We haven't changed it yet.
No.
No. So 625, you cover 625 square feet of new impervious surfacing. It triggers this thing.
Every 5 years or every,
No, per project.
so I could come back in 5 years and ask to do it again.
Yes, you could incrementally do 600 square feet. and-
Well,
and
my-
But
take-
you're still
my
limited
point
by
in-
the 35%.
Yeah, until you hit 35%, but yeah, I guess you could have creatively,
Yeah.
You know, if somebody comes in and says, okay, I'm gonna add a, 625 square foot addition, and I'm gonna take out 1,000 square feet of concrete driveway and replace it with brick,
we have seen that as 625 square feet of new surface.
right,
We have not, and the code allows you to replace one surface with the same surface and kind of be a
Yeah.
net, no difference. But if it's an addition and it was. a
well, what I'm saying
driveway-
is if they took out 1,000 square feet of concrete driveway per se, and put in pavers a pervious surface. So they added, you know, an equal area of pervious surface. Would they need to go through the whole engineering?
The way we currently administer requiring stormwater plans, they would. You know, we just see that as a different,
What is your
We're
definition, what's the definition of pervious?
that's a good one. Matt is over there tipping over buckets and timing them to see how long it takes.
Well, how long do you have? I mean, what,
And how far away it runs.
yeah,
Yeah. I think our definitions allows water to penetrate through the surface, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Immediately.
our code,
Doesn't have any time designation, it's just, so it's very vague, I'd say.
yeah.
Yeah.
Don't we
we-
need to have a definition in our
no.
policy?
And it gives, our code gives examples. It says things like gravel, I don't
I
even
think
know.
just concrete and gravel, the two.
Concrete is impervious,
polar op- yeah.
gravel is pervious. And we have struggled with that, and I think that, and Matt has kind of administratively, and, because we have had people, from my perspective, pour concrete, and they call it porous concrete. They tip over a bucket, and then they say, in an hour from now, that puddle will be dry, so it, you know,
Yeah.
dry concrete will
dead of
wick
summer,
into
hell
water.
Summer, a windy day in the summer.
Yeah. So we've had to kind of administratively, you know, we say that is not pervious, but exactly how quickly the 5-gallon bucket needs to disappear, we have an administrative kind of threshold, and literally we have videos of how to do it, how to test for it, so people don't run into problems, but
So you do have a definition of pervious.
we have a policy of how, what we, but it's not really a definition in the code.
Yeah.
And it's
Hasn't
not,
been
it's not a
tested in
flow
court
rate.
yet.
It's not a fun. We've tried to beat Sullivan, me and my engineering buddy. Why a deck that high off the ground, open deck is pervious on Sullivan's Island, but 9 feet in the air, it's not. But anyhow, so it was pervious, and yes, that's their ordinance. And the engineer did use some calculations, I don't remember what there was a 2 in there, was it a 0.2 or something, you know, of permeability of the soil for discharge. And proved that, you know, what we wanted to do would have been fine, but they still didn't buy off on it. But so I'm sure you know that number. Do you know why it's never put into ordinances?
A flow rate, this is like a
Flow,
flow,
it's essentially-
a permeability flow rate.
I was just saying, why don't we say a flow rate?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd throw
I-
out 2 inches per hour, you know, where you tip a bucket over with something over, you pull it over and you start the thing. Now, whether it's saturated condition or unsaturated condition, those are 2 different things. Gotta go to school for that, though.
Matt has to go to school.
Continuing
I'm
ed.
too old.
That's one of the questions I have, never been so category, was it, group A soil types, which is what 99% of the island is.
That's
Has
like sandy
sand.
soils.
Yeah, has saturation of our infiltration rates above, like 1.6? 4.
4 inches
I
per
couldn't
hour.
figure, I've seen both, so
4
4.
inches, 4 inches per hour
Is
generally.
what a general dry sand,
Yeah, beachy sand.
beachy sand.
That's like, and with a regular antecedent moisture condition. So, by average.
4 inches per hour.
Yeah, fire hose.
Are we paying you by the regulations you established?
Yeah, I've got, because I've kind of had that question.
I think
or-
that's kind of, you know, it's in the weeds, but it's kind of helpful weeds.
Well, and I've gone through, like, trying to do measurements in my yard and stuff, and like you said, what's it, 2.5 times that in the first 30 minutes, something roughly?
Right, yeah, yeah, I mean,
So-
that like, yeah, it goes to like saturation and stuff.
Yeah,
And it's gotta-
starting from dry conditions, what does that give you? 8, almost 10 inches in the first hour should just go right into the ground. And that kind of gets back to my point of, if I'm pushing 3 inches of rain into my yard that can absorb at 10 inches, why do I need a vault? Or,
Is 4 inches per hour a reasonable, I mean, if that's what the ground is, could a pervious paver system be designed to meet that same permeability, or,
Could, yeah, absolutely.
and that would kind
But,
of,
you know, then being an engineer, I'd throw a safety factor on it, and like cut it in half,
Right.
you know, and say, because they'll probably never like sweep that driveway, so you
Right.
wanna,
You want it even more pervious, you
Yeah.
want the surface more pervious than the sand.
Yeah.
But
So
initially,
we've
it should be,
definitely,
yeah.
I mean, we've definitely just said if water gets through the first layer, that from our perspective has been pervious. I mean, you get into the sand condition below it, I think we've kind of said, well, that's existing condition. We're not gonna make you improve, we can't take the requirement that the surface be pervious and use that requirement to tell you to make the substrate even more pervious.
So let me see if I understood this part right too. So, gotta, you compact the soil, you reduce its,
Bad. That's bad.
yeah, so when you're putting in a paver, so the first thing they do, dig it out, compact all
They
the
do it
dirt,
wrong.
like,
9
so now
times out of
your rock bed becomes, so now our soil out here's got 1 inch per hour underneath the compacted driveway. So you've gotta push that water into a rock bed to hold it till it can drain through at 1 inch per hour to achieve
The 4 inches.
the 4 inches that it should have
Or-
achieved.
Or you're holding it, rather it's a 12-inch rock or 18-inch
Right.
base, or 24 inches is, I think, something that has to be fleshed out. Again, I go back to up on Cameron, where I think you would support a 4-inch per hour rain and
Right.
runoff, versus down the street a couple of hundred feet to
The
the
rec
lower
center,
end,
yeah.
where I don't think that soil, again, the recreation department does not percolate particularly well unless it's been a very dry month.
Right.
Well, yeah, it becomes like if the ground's
It's
saturated
saturated.
when you're starting, then you're gonna get much
Yeah,
less.
it's not necessarily
Right.
soil, it's the saturation condition. The
Yeah.
lower ends are so saturated, they just can't take anything more.
Exactly.
It's the same sand.
Yeah.
This one just happens to be drier up on the hill. This one down in the hole is wet.
It's like setting a sponge on the counter. It's
Yeah.
the lower, you know, if it's offset, the lower part's gonna stay wet much longer.
And that's, I think, the town has this geotechnical requirement that you have to, if you're gonna bring this system and you're gonna do a 24-inch deep thing, they gotta make sure that the groundwater's not 12 inches, because then you just cut your thing in half. So that's
I've never seen any driveway going in 24 inches deep.
Yeah, I think we kind of feel like if we see 10 or 12 inches, we feel like they're doing it right. And I don't know if that, but sometimes we'll see it just on a super thin layer, sand right on top of that, so.
But you also, like if you've got a sloping one, anything in the top's just gonna rush right through that gravel and out the bottom. So you also, again, the bottom's gotta be more or less at least whatever, 9 inches deep. So if you've got a raised lot, it could be much higher.
Yeah, but did it do that before you did the pervious pavers and gravel?
Right.
Well,
So
are they
have
pervious
you
pavers
not
or
really-
are they
it really
impervious
hasn't impacted
pavers?
anything if
And
it
a
does
pervious
run
grout.
At the
So
bottom.
that's a whole nother thing. There are two types of pavers, those that are
Yeah.
pervious and those that are not.
Right.
And most of the pavers that I've seen are not pervious, just their grout's pervious.
most of on the pavers, the perviousness comes from the gap in
Yeah,
between,
right.
the gap. So if you're designing and they're really close gap,
Yeah,
that's
your
not.
SOL. I mean, a
that's
lot of
not-
them
yeah,
come with the little
yeah.
ribs to
Yeah.
kind of guarantee, but then you know that puppy itself is impervious brick or block or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But, kind of like pervious concrete, you you leave a hose running on it and it goes away, at least for 10, 15 years. Like a clog,
Yeah.
I haven't looked at the
Still feels
ordinance, but are we still accounting for 50% and 100% different materials, or we've gone
No, 'cause
pervious
we-
and impervious?
Now we just require, it used to be, we now just say it has to be pervious.
Okay.
So, so you can't do a 50% pervious, a 50% impervious system, because we require it to all be 100% pervious.
But if we're going kind of to the regulating how much runoff, again, goes back to now that whoever's designing is gonna it's really not pervious or impervious as much as it's gonna be storage capacity of,
Right.
again, you can't get away from building, the pervious bricks on top of an inch of gravel on compacted dirt now.
Yeah, I think we could very easily make big improvements by just kind of requiring that those paver systems be, instead of just a pervious top,
Surface.
require that they be a storage tool for every new house that gets built. And I don't know how,
And encourage leaders to be brought subterranean in a gravel pit with the French drain to take it to that storage device.
But I mean,
I've been doing that for the last couple of projects.
all the paper manufacturers will give you guidelines of how much of a gravel base. I've seen projects where they don't do that, but yeah, you're, for the most part, looking at 9-inch, fairly coarse gravel base somewhere in that system to quote, call it impervious by the manufacturer.
Well, the other thing that you see is they have an existing concrete driveway, and they don't rip up all the concrete. They just put some shit on top of it and put the pavers in there.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
stuff, Nicole, they put stuff.
I'm sorry, stuff.
That's right.
And sometimes it's just gravel,
Shit is
and you
shit.
think you have a gravel driveway.
You just can't print it.
A few of those too.
Well, I'm glad we didn't define impervious versus, but there is a definition.
Administratively, we have guidance.
And there's pervious brick, and there's
Yeah.
not impervious brick.
Yep,
There's pervious asphalt. The marina
Yeah.
might use that
Yeah.
in their.
we use pervious
repaving.
concrete
Pervious concrete.
on the walkways. Apparently it's hard on everybody's feet.
And it's sitting on compacted ground, so it just goes through and then out the sides.
Just tell everybody it's coquina. It's coral. It's coral, that's all.
Yeah.
It's no worse on your feet than when you put shell in your concrete drive, if you could anymore, but you can't.
Really?
All right, are we any closer?
So are
Any
we at a
questions for
point
Rick?
where we want
Impervious
to
road, that's it.
adopt the
It would look like.
black
putting it in
box concept?
impervious concrete.
Or are there revisions needed to that concept at this
I think we'd have to
point?
develop, I think
there's
we're-
language needed, yeah.
yeah, we need kind of
So-
direction in terms of what you want us to develop. We'll go away but we would need you all to tell us we want a black box option, and then, I guess, if you can't kind of meet the black box, or you don't wanna adhere to the black box option, option B would be kind of a fully engineered type, I think, kind of along the same lines as what the, Town of Mount Pleasant Builders Guide is requiring. That's gonna be a whole, so far, we have been working with kind of a few keyword changes here and there in our draft, and I think we're kind of going towards, if that's directionally where you wanna go, I think we're kind of getting to like a technical document, like the Builder's Guide. Not that that's a negative thing, but just want everybody to kind of be aware it would be a significant deviation from where we currently are.
What do you need to enforce what we're trying to get at?
I think we would start hiring, we would need the language, we'd need it to get implemented, and then there would be a review regimen and inspection regimen that would be added to it. So kind of outsourcing to engineers to review and probably to kind of certify the as-built conditions are compliant with what was planned.
Does the private sector consult to cities?
Yeah, third-party review, that's what we call it,
Okay.
third-party review.
It's been years, but before there was Douglas, I think the city used to pay for Lee Batchelder to be the zoning administrator. That could be Sullivan's Island, I don't remember.
No, that was here.
That was here.
Yeah, Lee was,
But he worked for the city, so that was like city to city, that's a
Yeah.
little different than private to city.
The city of Charleston just came out with an RFQ to do third-party reviews.
all right.
My concern is the added expense across the board, almost for any property, moving forward of nearly $40,000 to $60,000 just to do anything out here. Currently, we don't have that layer of expense, and that is a concern to me. How many properties are we reacting to with bringing something that expensive forward? Is it so onerous that we need this $40,000 to $60,000 review on everything that takes place? And I'm just kind of
I
putting
think
that
going
out
forward,
in theory.
it wouldn't be a bad idea to have some structure into this, because we're not gonna get any better. I hear a lot of complaints from people about the flooding, and their perception of what the town is doing hasn't eased up anything. In fact, it's gotten worse. I think having something formal like this is a way of, well, taking you guys out of the hot seat and saying, you know, we're serious as a community, this is what we wanna do. We want to try to mitigate the runoff, the damage that it does through any storm event. And I know this past, 6 months have been an anomaly, but it doesn't mean it won't happen again. That's where I'm going with
It's only
that.
getting worse.
It's only gonna get worse.
Because the
What is that,
temperature of the
0.2
waters
inches?
down in Florida are
0.02?
exceptionally high.
So
More tropical.
I'm just leaning toward a more formal, conservative, call it drastic approach.
Well, you're talking about two different events. One's flooding from tidal sea level rise, and one's runoff. And again, we're talking specifically to this being runoff. And I
still
don't know how catastrophic it is. We have some one-off damage from it. We have some anomalies with flooding. We've identified a lot of that and have spent over $10 million, and I believe there's another 10 or 15 in the plans to alleviate some of those flooding issues like Palm Boulevard, Waterway Boulevard.
I don't know, we've spent quite that much, but it's been a lot of money.
Yeah, but there's, there are plans in the way community-wise to alleviate some of these things. Again, the one-off places that have sort of always been a problem, again, I go to 200 block, the 2nd Street block, of Charleston, Carolina, it's kind of always
It's always,
been there. I don't know, short of pumps, what you're gonna do
but
down
none of this
there.
would kick in until you start working over, 625 square feet? So you're not,
Well, if you use the black box, do you need the engineer?
there you go.
You know,
But you have that option kind of
and
in the
then do
format
you need
of,
to hire the commercial grading contractor, which these numbers are kind of more, I would steer towards the commercial grade of
Right.
construction as opposed to residential. We've gotten just a bunch of kids with, front end loader digging holes and pouring in gravel. I mean, it's not much more complicated than that. But, and it seems to work just as well or bad as any other system.
Rick, when you mentioned 60,000,
That's
was that,
construction.
well, I think it was 50 construction, 10 design potentially.
Plus or minus, yeah, 5 to.
Is that any solution? Or I guess you take away the 10 for the black, if it's kind of a black box solution. I mean, are you thinking that's kind of universally about what you're adding to a project? 50,000 in construction costs?
I mean, that's probably on the high side, I would think. I think you could probably figure something out.
If that was your focus, was trying to get it
Yeah, I want to do this cheaper.
as cheap as I possibly can.
Contractor
you
could figure out it.
You could do an awful lot of pervious surfaces and.
Yeah.
So how would the group, kind of hearing comments, I mean, how would the group feel about developing kind of this kind of black box solution first? See what that yields. If we still need kind of another step, then kind of go to the full extent of the Town of Mount Pleasant Builder's Guide example of, you have to analyze kind of downstream, upstream. how would I mean, is that kind of, I guess I'm seeing that as kind of a middle ground between where we currently are and the old village model.
The one thing I like about the old village model is that you hit these numbers, or you hit this builder's guide if you were doing a complete tear down and rebuild, or a complete new build. And then you also have that other end option. They're a little different, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think like you gotta do it for a pool.
Huh?
Like if you added a pool in the old
Right.
village, you have to do that. There's like no exception. It's like, there's like, you know, if you,
We specifically just took pools out.
Yes, we did.
By the way.
well, I mean, again, if you did anything that increased the impervious area, there's no 600 square foot
Yeah,
exception.
yeah.
Yeah, there's none of that. It's
So-
anything
Anything,
triggers,
any,
yeah. Death by
also-
1,000 cuts again.
Those lots are smaller and those homes are only getting more monstrous.
Yeah,
Are they
I don't
smaller
think
than
they
our
have
lots?
the
I don't-
restriction
It-
on lot
It just
development
feels
we
that way. I
have.
don't know if they are or not.
say that again?
Does Mount Pleasant have the restriction on lot,
coverage?
coverage that
I think
we
it- I
have?
think it does.
It's
Has-
building coverage.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, building coverage
Well,
on
there's
the
a big
lot,
difference,
which is lot coverage.
because they don't count driveways.
So you could pave
You can pave the whole
whole yard,
leaking place, because it's,
so not really, if you're here.
maybe not in the
Yeah.
overlay district, but generally,
Hmm.
it's,
Ours is-
40 and 60% building coverage.
Wow, so you allow a lot of coverage,
Yeah.
or we don't, I guess.
We don't.
But they also
yeah.
have infrastructure,
Uh-huh.
and except-
not in the old village.
not in the old
The-
village. and
Their
that's where
infrastructure's
they're-
about like ours?
Yeah.
So that 1670 stuff's just not holding up.
Yeah.
1685, is that what the sign says? When you enter Mount Pleasant?
We
I-
could-
But that's-
We could try the black box.
That's kind of just the rub, because those communities do have infrastructure, the old village, and we just really don't. And that's why we're at this, and I, kind of also agree very much with Sandy. I don't like to create incredible expense, if it's not gonna produce something fruitful. The projects that I had done where we did get consultants to design the drainage systems, they performed better, I gotta admit. Otherwise, we're just a bunch of rednecks digging holes and sticking in gravel, and it still works. But does it work as well as, the professional? I mean, the driveways with 18 inches of concrete or of gravel, that thing hums like a charm. It does a great job. And that was, engineered, actually, allayed, sorry.
I kind of go, like I said, for the new construction requiring, if it's, like I said, regrading the whole lot,
Right.
those projects.
That's a
yeah,
no-brainer,
That's a
certainly.
no-brainer. It gets
So
back to the
It's
other side.
It's
So
a little onesie twosie, somebody's trying to add
But I go
on,
back,
and you're
it
busting
seems
his
like
balls.
if I want to add 1,000
His
square
chops.
feet, and if we pick 3 inches of rain, 1 hour storm event, okay, I need 250 cubic feet of storage, whether I do that with a rain garden, a vault, or whatever. That's all, once I show that, whatever we decide, that should be good enough to say, you're not increasing runoff. You've compensated for what you've added, you don't need, that's a fairly minor expense.
Yeah.
It's, it's not near, $50,000, it's maybe 1,000.
So what would get us to a formula, back to your kind of original question, Douglas, that could universally be applied? And if I'm gonna do take down a house, an old Hugo damaged house on 34th Avenue or wherever it is in Forest Trail, I don't have to spend $30,000 to $40,000 to design a rock bed for my driveway, and still get my 3,500 square foot home or 2,500 square foot two-story home built up on pilings.
So you're just talking about a new rebuild.
Well,
Yes.
I'll go
Yeah.
back to yours. If you're putting it in
regrading.
the same footprint, why do I need to do it? I'm not gonna increase.
That wouldn't
If I-
trigger that.
I fix
Wouldn't
it,
trigger
yeah.
it,
I don't need to spend the whole engineering survey to say, I'm taking this brick house, I'm putting a new house in the exact same
match the
footprint, I'm not
footprint.
increasing my
I'm not taking
coverage.
vegetation.
I'm actually
then-
taking out some, maybe.
But I am going to. I mean, that's the one that you're
You're-
stumbling with.
I think
am
Sandy's
going to
asking,
have
what would it
a
take to
little
do?
bit bigger than what my 1,300, J.C. Longhouse used to be. I'm gonna increase it to whatever my lot will take. I'm gonna max out my lot. I'm gonna get all 35% of my lot coverage. So that's where I think we're trying to come in and say, okay, here's what you need to do. And I'm trying to avoid the $30,000 to $50,000 engineering and construction for this. Is there a formula that would satisfy what we're talking about here? And you gotta dig a 18-inch or 12-inch and gravel it, and
So
that
you're
that
saying you
gets
wanna
us the
do a
runoff.
small modification, but it's
No.
really a big modification?
No, he's saying, I think the question he's asking, what is the least
Okay.
we could require in terms of construction and design and allow him to build a 3,500 square foot house?
KISS.
And so I guess
That's your
that's
black box.
the black
That's
box.
That's the black box.
And
If
then
it's-
with
and it would be
options that
s-
say you can do these things.
It would
to
be
meet
something
that
like
requirement.
3,500 square feet of surface equates to 1,000 square feet by 2 feet deep.
Okay,
So that's 2,000 cubic feet
Yeah.
of stone, wherever you want to put it.
Right.
And you have to run all your water to that stone. That's kind of how the black box would work in my mind.
And
And we'd get
something about
help,
like, you gotta like make sure the groundwater's not.
make
within
sure the groundwater's
within-
far enough that
Part
it's
of the
not.
calculation.
yeah,
And would
'cause
you
that
deed
would
it-
be
Well, you knew it when
problem
you start
in some
digging.
areas.
Would you deed it? Would you put it on the
Wait
deed?
till a nice dry spell.
I hadn't thought that we
keep the
would.
septic
I mean, that's,
I
but
mean,
it
if
would,
that's a requirement and he has to have that, if somebody comes in behind him and changes everything.
well, but that's every aspect of the zoning code. I mean, we tell you how you have to do it, and if you just go and undo that in violation of the code, you're in trouble.
Yeah, it's like people
I guess I'm
adding
thinking somebody-
rooms.
But
to
it could
the-
be documented in
the
the
guideline.
final survey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. If it's documented somewhere,
Yeah,
then it's,
Right, where is your retention located?
Well, it's gonna be documented in a drawing of some sort,
Right.
I assume, when you submit for your building plans,
right.
because we're requiring that.
But
That's
not
part of
deed,
what we're
I was
talking
understanding that to be like recorded at the ROD office.
No.
Like
it's,
an easement or something is what I was
right.
hearing.
I mean, so, in some cases, would you do that and make it an easement? No, I mean, final survey is fine, but in what cases, I could ask you this, would you record it on a?
There's, I know jurisdictions that do that, and then jurisdictions that don't do that.
Mhm.
And it's for certain other things, we
Okay.
have like flood mitigation structures, like walls. We have like what we call it trip walls, and those, like, we're putting those on a lot, and we really don't want those to go anywhere, so that's.
So you're getting an easement. The
That's
town
good.
is getting an
No,
easement.
The homeowners, there's a covenant put on the deed, and it's like, it runs with the deed, and it says, you cannot take this out. This is your responsibility, you can't come out. This
So
is-
we do actually do that with homeowners building their own homes. There's a requirement, they can't rent it or sell it, and it's part of the state law that they have to record at the deeds office, something that would pop up at a closing if it happened within 2 years of them building. So that is a thing, but it's kind of this specifically to squelch a sale within 2 years of it getting finished. But that's an example.
I'm always worried about a less formal detention system being somehow abandoned in the future, or, we go through this process, and you make all these rules, and you talk about this and all this, and you try to, you want it to work, but someone just could, I'm gonna re-sod, and, oh, by the way, I'm gonna take that hole out. And then
What's all this?
And then.
My flowers aren't gonna grow in
And
gravel.
that
Maybe there's
concurs,
buried
Again.
treasure down
and
there.
that's what you were saying, you can just, over time, throw up some sod and forget about it.
Well, I mean, the ones that I had done on Palm Boulevard are sodded over with a catch basin.
Okay,
And-
so there's still their formal detention.
Yes, and there, in
Retention,
this
sorry.
one piece of property, there were 6 of them located in the rear property. and then the front property is the driveway, and it's, and along the sides where the roof's, there's no gutters, cause I can't stand gutters, but where the roof comes down, there is a gravelled walkway that
Right.
has those, we ran 2 8-inch corrugated pipes in gravel to those drainage systems. We did have to surcharge the front, the driveway, because the groundwater was higher. And that surcharge went right to one of those back
Right.
rain gardens, I call it, and just disappeared. It ran for a day and just. So, you know, it certainly can work.
But the
So-
worry is somebody abandoning it. That's,
Right.
The black box sounds like
We got
I'm hearing
consensus
everyone,
around
we're kinda-
the black box?
moving towards that.
it's a
um,
good starting point,
first- yeah,
and if it
just-
doesn't work,
We need a place to start.
we need a place to start.
All right, black box.
And,
Let us-
you
let
wanna
us
tweak
work.
some of it and
Matt, you
back
get out
to
there with
us.
the bucket?
Follow me,
Yes, we
trust me.
He
I'll
will
get out there
he
with
will
the
get called out.
stopwatch.
He will, yeah. He's gonna go viral online.
So, and, you know, so is it,
You'll do
you
perk
know,
tests
so
next.
is it 4 or 6 inches of water in a bucket that gets poured, or do you contain an area
There you
and
go.
pour 4 or 6 inches of water in there?
So you have to glue the bucket down to the surface. You literally do.
Do you?
You glue the
So there's
bucket.
protocol.
Matt is not to that, he's not to that level. He takes 5 gallons, he dumps it,
Right.
sees how far it
See that.
goes, see how quickly it disappears.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's kind of a distance away and a time to disappear.
And no fluid
Number of bricks
mechanics involved.
covered? Is that the one, the number of bricks that get wet?
Yes, well, I did use it one time.
Yeah.
Okay.
What if
But
they
the-
don't pass? Like, I
You
mean,
pull
like
it
what?
up.
Have we told people to pull it
Yeah,
up?
oh yeah, well,
Okay.
and when it doesn't pass,
The
it like you
administrative.
dump it over, 5 gallons goes to that flag and sits there for 40 minutes. Like, well, no, eventually it will dry.
So when do you test it, before or after they're finished?
After they're finished. Yeah.
Well, we
Generally,
would,
well,
but
we
we give advice on this is
Right.
what you should
You will
do.
be
And we're gonna
tested.
And you're
confirm
gonna,
this.
we're gonna confirm it, and then it gets done, and then
There will be a test at the end of this exercise.
Yeah.
And it could be
Study
very
it.
costly.
You get to rip up
I think I would be practicing along the way.
All right, how would the group feel about us trying to put some parameters around a black box to come back to you next
Yes.
month?
I think that would be awesome.
It's good?
Yes.
All right. Rick, thank you. We'll
Yes,
be in
thank you
touch.
very
Rick has been here 3 times in the last 25 hours.
He's gonna start
He was here
charging
night before last, or
Yeah.
last night.
He was here last night, night
boy.
before last,
Yep.
all last week.
But a great sport coach.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
All right, thank you guys.
We'll be in
Thanks,
touch,
Rick.
like within
Fashionable
a few
engineer.
hours, probably.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
You're gonna take a
Wait,
break
no,
from
wait.
me.
It's March Madness.
All right, you're gonna take a break for 12 hours, and then we'll talk.
Get, get your nap in.
Yeah, get
quick.
your nap in. Thank you, Rick. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
Well, that was good. I mean, I think that's,
I think it's very
I
helpful.
think that's the place to start.
and I think we're clear enough.
Yep.
We'll get you a starting point. We'll kick it around a little
Yeah,
bit.
we got a lot of information.
Kick the bucket.
Very helpful.
Yeah, kick the bucket over and,
We just gotta decide whether to use it.
yeah.
And again, I just, my concern about the additional cost, is, when you do certain things, there are thresholds that kick in with the sewer and the water company that are extremely expensive. 30,000 is probably a very low number for what it'll cost for anybody that's doing anything with the homes the way we're talking, particularly a tear down in a new home. And so it just, you know, we're not gonna attract a lot of young families out here. Can I say that anymore?
But yet there are.
With an added $100,000 expense on these properties.
No, but you gotta also protect your the neighbors.
Yes.
Well, and I think that what we're doing does that, and I don't think that it is, I do not believe in my heart of hearts that this is an island-wide, every property has a problem when they do a tear down and a new build. I think that there are some isolated cases that need a lot of focus at the level we've talked about, and I've kind of pointed out some areas. We know where the the low-lying areas are, the problem properties are, for the most part. After that, I think we need to be a little more conservative with our pushing an expense like we were talking at, 30 to 50,000. I don't know about you, it takes me a long time to make that kind of money. So,
Well, I do think the island policy kind of went from no policy to then lot coverage, to then ratcheting down lot coverage, to then all surfacing has to be pervious. It's been a very incremental adjustment. I mean, this to me seems like kind of the logical next type step. And I think that it has helped over time. I mean, I think that we used to get calls like, what the heck? And we kind of said, well, they can just do that. There's nothing keeping them from doing that. And those calls have become kind of less and less frequent. And even landscape designers that we're doing now, I mean, I think that's helped a lot, but I think this would help even more.
well, and I would add that our square footage limits, we're at 5,000 square feet, right?
No, the maximum you could ever cover, or
What's the
heated,
maximum highs, yeah,
7,000 is the most. If you had an enormous lot, you could never cover more
but
than
it has
seven.
to be at that 65, 35 home
Yes.
coverage.
That's right. That would be a
65%
big.
of
That would be a really
land has
large
to be
lot.
open.
Yeah, I
Right.
think more of our issues now are beyond the 35%,
Right.
is all the quote impervious, it's really not impervious, it's still being
Yeah, I mean, I
being
think
put out.
just we kind of said this. I think just kind of beefing that up administratively and potentially with the ordinance of not only does the surface have to allow, but something below it needs to hold all
To
that
retain
water,
it.
to
Yeah.
retain it.
Right.
All right, I think we're good.
Great.
Is that
There's
on
no
you?
more new business. Is
No.
there any old business?
No.
No more business.
Wait, did I?
Do we have a
Just a
motion
quick
to-
question, I'm hearing from neighbors about the noise ordinance. And that's getting reviewed and rewritten and
Yep.
tweaked by, different entities. Is that gonna come out anytime soon? Are we gonna review it again, or is this gonna
No,
go
it's
from
entirely
council?
in the kind of public safety domain of the city, so it's going through the Public Safety Committee. It was discussed by full council last night. I think it's gonna go for one more pass through the Public Safety Committee, and then council will hold, I think they're gonna hold a first reading this month, understanding that there will be some modifications. So it has been bouncing around, I think, for 2-3 years now. And I think it's finally kind of getting to the point where it's gonna get voted on this month and then potentially next month. I think we were solely put into that because David's kind of,
I spoke up.
David's unique expertise in the area. I mean, he kind of, people were aware of his background, and so that was a little bit of an anomaly that this group would get a public safety issue, but I think it's because of David's kind of unique qualifications on that
Did they
one
know that
issue.
going into this, or is that back-ended? Did they know your qualifications when the noise ordinance hit?
No, I spoke up.
Oh.
He just raised his hand and said, I know about this stuff. I'm like, oh, here you go.
But the,
And they haven't let go yet. He was there last night.
I think it's awesome.
I was to say, in having the planning commission, I think we worked well together, so having the discussions that didn't seem to be coming out at council, I think helped at least clean it up to a point that it's now at,
Yeah,
anyway.
absolutely. It's been good. It was good.
It's great.
We'll see.
It's much quieter out there now.
Wait, well, yeah, but
Wait, give it some time.
That's right, give us some time.
Spring break has only just started. Any motions to adjourn?
Yes.
I'm gonna
Have a
stay
motion to
longer.
adjourn.
Motion and a second.
Second.
All those in favor?